What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to look through some of your Gameweek 9 wildcard drafts, and I will, of course, give my thoughts on them as well. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you are new around here as well. So before we jump into the actual drafts, I put a tweet out asking for you to send them in to me, and I went through the first 100 replies to have a look, as always, at who the most popular players were, but I also noted down the different goalkeeper combinations, and I can't believe how many different ones there were. Now, obviously, all those ones on the right and a couple on the left that are 1% were only in one of the teams that I checked, but still, there were 22 different goalkeeper combinations, and I don't quite remember anything like this ever happening in FPL before. There's a few reasons for that. One, there is genuinely quite a bit of choice at different price points, but also people are a little bit unsure. Maybe some of it's being unsure about who is going to be number one between Ward and Everson. Some people possibly taking the gamble that Everson will get his shot sooner rather than later. Or maybe it's just that people want to save a bit of money, and Everson is 3.9. The most popular combinations all involve Guaita. So Guaita and Ward was 23%. Guaita and Everson was 20%. I think given that the only real tough game for Crystal Palace is the Chelsea game in Gameweek 9. It wouldn't be the end of the world if you had to play Guaita for that fixture. So if you go for Everson, hoping that he wins his place sooner rather than later, or you just save an extra 0.1 million, that's not necessarily that bad of a choice. But ultimately, I think what this shows, because of how many people have gone for Ward and how many have gone for Everson, the only way to have a guaranteed backup goalkeeper is to spend a bit more money. So go for maybe 4.5 million keepers. I think there was some people here with, like Raya and Sanchez, for example. Pope and Raya, that's a lot of money on goalkeepers. Or you go for the Everson and Ward combination, because you know if Ward loses his place, you've got Everson on the bench. That combination was only in 5% of teams. So people not liking that at all. And obviously that makes sense because Leicester have conceded so many goals so far this season. So Guaita definitely came up the most. Then it was probably Ward. There's one goalkeeper on here that I didn't see at all in the 100 teams that I checked. He does come up in the first draft we're going to look at, but I was surprised because that's the goalkeeper I'm very keen on if I can get enough money. So we'll talk about him in a minute. But that was the goalkeeper combinations. And then you got the popular players. So I didn't go through every single player and list them all. I just went through the ones that I knew were going to show up quite a bit. So for defenders, Reece James was the most popular. 88% of teams had him. Then it was 83% with Trippier. So people not ready to give up on him just yet. 72% had Cancelo, and only 51% had Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, when you look at overall FPL managers, 51% is quite a lot, but when you're looking at engaged managers that are really thinking about this, they're following FPL accounts on Twitter, probably thinking about their wildcard quite a lot, I think Trent at 51% is quite low. So he was the least popular out of those four. As you might expect, Maddison in 92%, Zaha in 88%, Salah only in 40% of teams, right? 4 in every 10 had Salah, that was it. He is kind of a differential compared to normal. That almost makes me want him in my team even more. So 40%, that might go up as we get closer to the deadline. We'll have to wait and see. Haaland in 98%. Fair play to the two people that I check teams for that are not going to go for what a lot of people would say is the most essential player in FPL right now. Mitrovic 86%, Tony at 48%, and then Solanke all the way down in 24%. So that's the popular players. Is there anyone there that you're surprised to see is so high or so low? Let me know in the comments below. So what I've done for this video, any draft that I've used, I've put it into a website called FPL.team, which has an FPL transfer planner. That way we can see what the team is going to look like in a few weeks and identify whether there's any issues or things to think about. The only slight downside is I've put them all in under my team ID, because I don't have the team ID for everyone that sent their team in, and I've got slightly different squad value. So when I put this team together, the first one I'm going through, I've still got $1 million to spend, but I know from the screenshot that was sent to me, they've got nothing in the bank, right? So we have to assume there's no money for upgrades unless we make some downgrades down the line. So first of all, we had 22 goalkeeper combinations just a minute ago. None of them featured Fabianski. I really like him, right? I'm coming around to the idea that might even be my preferred goalkeeper, possibly over Guaita. I'm not quite sure about that because there is a 0.5 million difference. But I think up against Jose Sa and up against Nick Pope, I think Fabianski could do all right. I know, obviously, Zuma is a cheaper way into that West Ham defence, but for most people wildcarding, they're trying to fit 3 or even 4 of Trent, Trippier, James and Cancelo into their teams. There's no real place to play Zuma every single week. So if you wanted to cover that West Ham defence, if you thought they were going to continue doing pretty well, they've got the fixtures to do that, right? So they got home games against Wolves and Fulham, and then an away one against Southampton. Either side of Bournemouth at home is Liverpool and Man United away. Not ideal, I get it. But then it's Crystal Palace and Leicester at home. So I really like West Ham's fixtures. I just know from my own draft, which I'll talk about later on this week ahead of the deadline, I'm struggling to find the money to fit him in. And for this team, it might be one way that you can get some more money to make upgrades elsewhere if you wanted to. Now, the one thing that stands out to me for this team, which a lot of you are going to have to think about, is there's 3 Man City players and 1 Arsenal. So when you get to game week 12, you got 4 players blanking. Now you can of course take one of them out, but which one you're going to take out? I would assume for this team, like most people aren't going to take out Haaland. I think a lot of people have got money built up in Martinelli. I would assume for this team it's probably going to be De Bruyne. The main issue for that is you get to game week 12 and the ideal swap is probably to Salah. But this team's got no money in the bank, so you can't do a straight swap, which means you've got to take money out elsewhere. And that is why I was saying on an earlier video this week that when you are planning your team, you need to think about future moves as well, because it might be worth just making that downgrade now. Now, an easy one for me would be Tony straight to Solanke, right? That allows you to bring him in, then you just do De Bruyne to Salah, and then you just bench the other 3. So you do Martinelli Martinelli out, Andreas in, and Gay in as well. So Nico Williams, okay, Brighton away is not the easiest fixture, but for someone that's 4.1, I wouldn't completely hate having to play him if I was trying to get cash out of the rest of my to spend elsewhere. And Gay's got Wolves at home, so they are 2 pretty good bench options for game week 12 in particular. Okay, it's not necessarily great having to play Andreas, but it's not the end of the world. So you can get through it, and that's probably the best way to do it. If we just reset this game week, the other way might be, if you wanted Salah, by the way, you might not, but the fixtures from game week 12 are pretty good, is to just downgrade Fabianski to someone a little bit cheaper straight away. Like, you could even go for the Ward Everson route if you really wanted to, and then you've got that extra $1 million to spend on an upgrade later on. So that's just something to think about. Again, it's not the end of the world, but one of the great things about wildcarding this week is you can almost deal with that Man City and Arsenal blank right now and not have to wait until game week 12 till you deal with it. And there might be other transfers and stuff that come up. So people have just wildcarded in game week 8. They're already concerned about Isak. They're already concerned about Patterson. The same thing could happen for us. So you don't want a situation where you're planning transfers every single week and not taking into account that other things can happen. Elsewhere, there's not really a huge amount to say. I do think the third forward slot is between Tony and Solanke, and if you've got enough money and you're genuinely happy with the rest of the team, then I do think Tony's a really nice option. Zaha and Maddison look pretty much template at this point from game week 9 onwards, and then really it's just preference in defence. If you want Trippier, Cancelo and James and no Trent, I wouldn't strongly argue against that. I do think the main time to have the Liverpool players is game week 12 onwards. But again, if that's what you're thinking, well, I need Trent, I need Salah from game week 12, how are you going to get them with no money in the bank? So that's definitely something to consider. I would all put your teams into FPL.team and work out how it's going to look over the next few weeks. So this second team does give us a pretty good talking point, which is whether or not we should be going 4 at the back. I keep talking about how most of us are looking at Trent, Trippier, James and Cancelo and trying to figure out which 3 we should go for. One solution to that is just to have all 4, drop one of your midfielders or drop one of your forwards instead. Now I will say this draft is not exactly like mine, but it's fairly close, and I don't think I'd be willing to drop any of those midfielders. Zaha, Martinelli, Salah or Maddison. Mitrovic is a player that a lot of people got on cheap, and Haaland is obviously going to be in most people's drafts, as we saw 98% of the 100 that I checked. So in this case, they've dropped the third forward. Now, when I originally looked at this, I thought I would definitely prefer to have a third forward over one of those defenders. But when I thought a bit more about it, if you want that third forward to be Tony, then you've probably got to drop Trent or Cancelo, unless you've got a hell of a lot of team value. So that's difficult, because I think both of those could be pretty decent for game week 9. So then you're looking at dropping James. I think he would probably be the first name on the team sheet for me, just because of the fixtures and his attacking potential. So then it's about dropping Trippier, but you can't realistically, for most teams anyway, drop Trippier and have Tony instead. So then it's a straight up shootout between Trippier and Solanke. And again, when I thought about that, I thought, well, I'd rather have Solanke, set and forget. He's in that forward spot, so if I want to switch to a different forward, I can. More so than I will with a defender. And right now, I'm struggling to see outside of these 4 a lot of kind of, the traditional kind of Robertsons, Perisic's, etc. that I really want in my team. I could double up with Chelsea. I just don't see where I'm going to go unless Chilwell suddenly becomes super fit and is playing every game. So I was thinking I'd rather have Solanke, because then you can move to another forward. But Solanke's only 5.7 million. So if we've got no money in the bank, where do we move to? You can't just suddenly drum up 1.5 million to go to Tony or to go even more to Harry Kane. So actually, by having those 4 defenders, you've actually maybe got some slightly easier routes out. Okay, Trippier's only, 5.4 million now, but there's plenty of defenders around that 5 million price point that later on you could move on to if you wanted to instead. Now, I do personally still quite like Solanke as a set and forget option on penalties, etc. But I don't think Trippier's fixtures are that bad that you should be massively worried. Lots of home games up until game week 14, so Villa, Everton and Brentford. I do think Man United and Spurs could both score against Newcastle, so unless he keeps up those attacking returns, there's probably not going to be many points here. And obviously a lot of us are hoping that Mitrovic will be scoring in game week 9 as well. So there's potentially 3 out of the next 6 we're hoping, or not hoping, either hoping or expecting Trippier to concede in. And then 15 is Southampton away and 16 is Chelsea at home. So I do think Newcastle's fixtures are a little bit of a mixed bag. So personally, I do still like Solanke, but I can see why people are looking at 4 at the back, and I do think it's quite good. The one issue I see people running into, and again, this is going to be quite template, that the 3 Arsenal Man City players that people have are Cancelo, Martinelli and Haaland, but look what happens when you get to game week 12. And again, there's chances in game week 10 or 11 where maybe people are thinking of solutions to deal with this, but if you get to game week 12, okay, you can bring Patterson in for Cancelo, that's fine, you can bring Andreas in for Haaland, but then because you've gone for 4 defenders and a bench fodder forward, well, Green was just not going to get any minute. He might get a minute or 2 if you're lucky and get you like 1 point, but most of the 4.5 million or below forwards are just going to get you next to nothing, right? 1 point at the most. And you might say, like, if you really think Trippier is going to massively outscore someone like Solanke, that over the course of game week 9 to 16, that's a price worth paying. But I think for most people, they just won't like this. So you'd have to make an additional transfer to get rid of one of these players and bring them back. And again, that might not be a bad idea. That's something that I'm considering doing, where I start with Cancelo and switch to Trippier in game week 12 and then switch back to Cancelo. The problem is, who'd you go for this week? I mean, you could do Cancelo to a different Newcastle defender, for example. You could do Cancelo to Van Dijk and just, or even Robertson, and double up on the Liverpool defence possibly for 1 week. That might be a way around it, but I would just think about that. I think that's the one good thing, and we actually spoke about this pre-season, the one good thing about having 3 forwards is you get to select 2 defenders instead, and defenders provide a lot of value in the fact that they are cheap. So a lot of them are kind of 4.5 or below, and you can just put them on your bench and just use them when you need them. When you start off with a team like this, you're essentially saying that one of my bench options is just never going to be an option. And for a normal season where there's no blank game weeks, or for a normal set of game weeks where there's no blanks, that's fine. You won't need to use them. But we know we've got a blank in game week 12. We know that's going to happen. We need to start thinking about that now. So if I'm looking at this team, I like it. And I think Trippier versus Solanke, fair enough, that's just preference. That's the only thing I would think about, is how are you going to deal with game week 12 with that 3rd bench player just not really being an option. So for the 3rd team, I've picked one with Raheem Sterling in. I've had a lot of questions about him. Should he be in our drafts? How do we fit him in and stuff like that? Even if he continues to play this left wing-back role under Potter, I still think he's going to get advanced enough and into decent positions to get plenty of goals and assists. So I'm not really worried about his output. I just think his price point is a little bit awkward at 10 million to try and fit in, especially if you're going to have Haaland and Salah. Now, for those of you that are happy to captain Haaland every single week, you'll think of a solution for game week 12 when he blanks, and you're going to drop Salah to go for Sterling instead. Fair enough. That gives you like an extra 2-3 million to spend elsewhere. That's pretty decent. You can have an overall really good squad by not making a huge sacrifice, as long as you're definitely happy to go about Salah, of course. But to have all 3, Haaland, Salah and Sterling, that's where, in my opinion, the problems lie. So you've got Sterling in this team, for example, then straight away you can't have Cancelo or Reece James. You've got to have Justin in instead, which, okay, fair enough. Nottingham Forest at home might not be that bad. But then you've got Fofana and Emerson and Colback on the bench. So don't get me wrong, Andreas Pereira is not going to get you a huge amount of points. But if there's a game where there's a blank, for example, in game week 12, you'd rather have Andreas Pereira rather than Colback, who probably isn't going to get you any minutes at all. Fofana could be an issue at 4.4 million. We don't know if he's going to get regular starts. And Emerson with Cresswell around definitely isn't nailed. Now, of course, if you had a bit more money to spend, spend, you could change those defenders to other ones, but you're still making quite a few sacrifices just to have Sterling, who I would argue you're probably not going to captain that much. Even if we look at kind of game week 11, where Liverpool play Man City, maybe you don't want to go for Salah or Haaland captain. Aston Villa away, I mean, it's okay, yeah, you could captain him, but I mean, it's not amazing. It's not someone you definitely need. And then the same in game week 12 for Brentford away. That's a pretty good week to have Sterling, but I don't know if that's necessarily a massive fixture that I would really want to captain someone in. So I think that's part of the issue for me. And look, I know this is basically bringing it back to the template, but sometimes it's just nice to visualise what that money can do for you. So if you just make one change with Sterling back to Martinelli, who a lot of people have got, suddenly instead of Justin, you've gone up to Cancelo, and you've still got an extra, in my case, I've still got an extra 0.9 to spend. This person might have slightly less, I don't know. But if you wanted to be sure, instead of Emerson, you have Zuma. And then if you want to be sure about Fofana, you can swap into a 4.8 million defender, whoever you want to. And suddenly that team just feels a little bit better than it did before. You've still got Solanke in there, but that's one of the sacrifices you make for having Trent and Cancelo. But ultimately, I just think because you're probably not going to captain Sterling, and I don't agree with the whole, well, if you're not going to captain them, you shouldn't have them, because eventually you've got to spend your money. I just think for 10 million, does he offer enough for all the other sacrifices you have to make, right? You could go from Colback, you could keep Fofana, right? Even if you wanted Justin here, right? Let's say you want Justin instead of Fofana. You could do Colback, even if you didn't want Andreas Pereira. You could risk that Leon Bailey, for example, is going to keep starting. In game week 12, where there's a blank, he's got Fulham away. That could be decent. I just think overall, that looks like a better squad just by making that one change from Sterling to Martinelli. Obviously, you can do that all over the pitch. You could keep Sterling and downgrade Salah to Martinelli. That will give you even more money to spend. But ultimately, I think having all three is just detrimental to the squad in the long term. Again, just my personal opinion, but that is why I probably will not have Raheem Sterling. There might be a better way to get him in, but I haven't quite thought of it yet. So I think this team is probably the most template of the lot we've seen so far. And I don't say that in a bad way. You know me, I just think you should pick the players that are going to score the most points. It's that simple. Who cares if they're template or not? But as we saw from the numbers at the start of the video, most of these players, or a lot of them, are going to be in a lot of people's Game Week 9 wildcard teams. But it's definitely still worth talking about to see if there's any issues or things that stand out to me. So from all the kind of tinkering I've done with my own draft, I do think it's almost impossible to have Trent and Cancelo and Tony as well. So you've got to make that sacrifice in a 3-4-3. If you want to have Cancelo in that team alongside James and Trent Alexander-Arnold, you've got to drop Tony down to Solanke. So that might not be something that people are willing to do. I do think if you're going to go without Cancelo, this is probably the time to do it. If you hope that Man United score, I don't think Man United are going to win that game, but they could score away to Man City. Well, that's one clean sheet gone. I think most of us expect him to lose the clean sheet against Liverpool. Then it's a blank in game week 12. So the only real good fixture over the next 4 game weeks for Man City, or at least from a defensive point of view, is probably Southampton at home. But just to counter my own point, we know how attacking he can be, and we know how good that Man City defence is. Will it be completely out of the question for them to get 2 or 3 clean sheets in the next 3 game weeks? Absolutely not. So there is a risk going without him, but the one thing it does is gives you less issues to deal with later on. So the thing I like about this team is it's well thought out with the bench. So when we get to, and again, I know I'm not talking about game weeks 10 and 11 a lot, but people can obviously make their own transfers in those weeks. I think with most game week 9 wildcards, there's not going to be a huge amount of transfers to do in game weeks 10 or 11. I don't think we'll get to the point of burning transfers, but it might get to the point where in game week 11 we're making luxury transfers. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But when you get to game week 12 for this team, well, you've got Gay against Wolves, so you can just put him in for Martinelli, and then you can either play Andreas or Kilman away to Crystal Palace for Haaland, and then you've still got a bench player if one of these players happens to miss out, because you've got Kilman in there as well, and you're not having to deal with Cancelo. The only thing I would say, and I've got 0.3 million left for this one, Tony does make it difficult to get Cancelo later on. So again, you could sell him if you wanted to. If you've got a bunch of extra transfers, he could be the way. You could do, again, that move I spoke about earlier, Tony to Solanke, that gives you that money to upgrade the defence. But if you want to keep him, bearing in mind the fixtures afterwards of Villa, Wolves and Forest, it's very hard in game week 13 when Man City's fixtures are really good again. So just to quickly look at them, Brighton, Leicester, Fulham and Brentford. It's hard without selling Trent to get Cancelo in. And this is the start or around the start when Liverpool's fixtures get good. So you could make a case to do Reece James, who has Man United, Brighton away, Arsenal at home, Newcastle away, up to Cancelo, but you still need £1 million to do that because James is only 6 million. He's really good value. So that's something to think about. They are basically the key decisions that wildcarders this week are having to make, right? Do you go for Tony? If you do, it's very difficult to go to Trent or Cancelo if you don't start with them. If you go 4 at the back, it looks really good on paper. Trippier versus Solanke, or even James versus Solanke, however you want to look at that kind of decision that you have to make, is fine, but you've got one less bench player. They are the main things that people are considering. For what it's worth right now, I think I'm going to be on Solanke with no Trippier and just go for Trent, Cancelo and James right from the start, but it's difficult. We've not seen any drafts either with Everson and Ward. I do think it sounds absolutely crazy when you say it out loud because of how bad Leicester have been, but it does provide a lot of value. And for those of you that are struggling, for a few weeks, what is it, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 8 game weeks of the season, could we just risk that Leicester could get like, I don't know, 1 clean sheet, maybe 2, 3 if we're absolutely lucky, and that money could then be better spent elsewhere? That's something that I'm considering, but they are definitely the main decisions. I think one thing we've not talked about in this video is whether or not we can sell Martinelli. I'm going to look at that a little bit more next week. I do think with the fixtures, it's a conversation to be had, right? You've got the blank in 12, Spurs and Liverpool next. Even Chelsea away in Gameweek 15 is not great, but I just don't think the midfielders around that price are that great. Like if I go to, what we put out, like £7 million midfielders so far, I've got to order them by price. I mean, this has still got Rafinha in, who's obviously not there. That hasn't updated. Bernardo Silva's okay, but I do think there's other better Man City options. Haaland, Cancelo, plus one more defender, maybe even Foden instead. I'm just not a big fan of Bernardo Silva. Harvey Barnes is okay, but if you've got Martinelli at 6 million, you've got to find an extra 0.6 million to get to Barnes, because you can only sell Martinelli for 6.3. And Barnes' fixtures are pretty good, as we know, because we're all going for Maddison. They're pretty good from Game Week 9 onwards. But is it worth finding that extra money? Right? I'm already talking through a lot of these teams. They don't have a huge amount of money to upgrade players. Where are they finding it to get Harvey Barnes? So that's a consideration. Grealish, Coutinho, no. Obviously, Martinelli's there. Rashford's been injured. I mean, Odegaard's fine, but I'd rather have Martinelli instead. Sinistera could be an interesting punt. Ward-Prowse I'm just never interested in. So I think there's a conversation to be had about selling Martinelli, but there's a reason we're seeing him in so many of these sides. Excellent value, still some good fixtures to come as well, and most people can deal with him with that blank by just using one of their bench players instead. So there we go, that was some of my thoughts on your Game Week 9 wildcard drafts. Is there anything there that you agree with, disagree? Can we go for at the back? What if it's a straight out shootout between Trippier and Solanke? Is there only one winner? I know how much people love Trippier right now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you have enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. Plenty of non-wildcard stuff to come as well this week. Transfer tips, Game Week preview you can get your questions in for. There'll be a deadline stream. I'll be doing my team selection video as well. So loads more to come. If you've enjoyed this one, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you again soon.